Hello, it's Stephen, author of Ho'oponopono. What is it? Can it help? And what are its limitations? Yesterday I wrote a blog post called Ho'oponopono and Magic, and that was all about the recent use of Ho'oponopono in order to get a better life, and also about some of the ancient history of Ho'oponopono, in which it was explained that the kahunas actually were very much engaged within magic. So it's worth a look. I'll put a link to it in the video description below. Today I want to talk about the myth of Ho'oponopono. Now, a myth is a very powerful story. It's a story from which other stories are moulded. And a myth has a life of its own. You could say that the story may be rooted in history, but the myth is our interpretation of that original story. It's a bit like history. History is always written by the victors, and so it always shows them up in a good light. And then over time, as the original culture begins to take hold again, the history gets rewritten. So over time, history changes. I'll give you an example of this. Some German engineers came to Troy during the late 19th century, and they began an excavation there. I suppose they were archaeologists rather than engineers, but never mind, that doesn't really matter. Anyway, they found a small building and they came to the conclusion that it was a toll gate. Some years later, some British archaeologists came there and they excavated it, and they decided that it was a guard post. And many years later, some American archaeologists revisited all the old findings, also went to visit the place, and they decided it was a fast food bar. And if you look at all their conclusions, they're all based upon the times in which the archaeologists lived, rather than what the building was actually for. Nobody knows what the building was for, apart from the people that lived there, and they lived there many hundreds of years ago. Anyway, Ho'oponopono has really taken on a life of its own. There are various different schools of Ho'oponopono. There are the original schools that come out of Polynesian culture, which would prefer to keep the secrets of Ho'oponopono secret, because the ancient elders or kahunas of Polynesian culture, quite a lot of them were black magicians, if you like. If you were part of a tribe, or if you were a tribe, you could either hire, or maybe you already had a kahuna living within your group, and he would attempt to throw spells upon the opposing tribe. That's an example of black magic. It's not the example like in Ho'oponopono of correcting an error. And for this reason, native Hawaiians can be very protective about Ho'oponopono. But the islands also depend very heavily upon tourism, and so they like to provide entertainment, if you like. So now we have hula girls, which entertain tourists, whereas hula girls originally were part of a religious ritual in the original Hawaiian Polynesian culture. The second group that we have are descendants of these original kahunas, and they practice Ho'oponopono in a very positive kind of way. They want to correct the error in perception in which we see ourselves as being separate. We have an inner world and an outer world, and that's the kind of paradigm of modern science. And what they're saying is, when you see somebody that's opposing you in some way, you have forgotten that actually you come from a common root. And if we get back to understanding the common root and being inspired by the common root, we can find a better solution than fighting or warring, or even employing a kahuna in order to cause trouble The third group are the followers of Morna Nalamaku Simeona. She took this concept of being responsible, 100% responsible for whatever comes into your awareness, and created a whole new model of Ho'oponopono out of it. She developed it and taught it to a man called Dr. Hugh Len, who many of you know because he's very famous for what we might say curing, in inverted commas, a whole world of psychiatrically disturbed criminals at Hawaii State Hospital. In fact, it took him 4 years to do this, and what he did is he conducted Ho'oponopono cleaning over their case notes rather than attempting to do any clinical work with them. Now, there is some dispute about how he went about this. There's a German called Michael Mickley, and he says that Dr. Hugh Len used a process taught to him by Morna, which had 14 stages to it. Now, I've studied a lot of Morna's recordings, and I continue to study whatever information I can get about her. So if you've got any, please comment below, because I'd love to hear from you. And by the recordings that I've got, she didn't always use 14 steps in order to complete her Ho'oponopono, but certainly she didn't use the familiar 4 phrases of the prayer for which Dr. Hugh Len is well known. Dr. Hugh Len said you can create this kind of cleaning by simply saying, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. And I've written on the blog post elsewhere that, in fact, this should be addressed to your inner child, which is also your subconscious mind, and it has the kind of interface that you might expect if you were talking with a toddler. Doesn't mean it's unintelligent. What it means is that it has a particular mode of communication. So when you talk to your subconscious, or your inner child, if you like, as a toddler, first of all, it only knows positives. It deletes anything that you say that's negative. It can't register them. You might think about this as your ability to see ultraviolet light. You can't see it, some species can, but you as a human being cannot. And the subconscious is the same. It is totally blind to negatives. And if you think about your experience with your own toddlers, if you have any, if you're told, don't go and jump in that puddle, almost immediately the toddler seems to have forgotten what you're talked about, and as if programmed will jump in the puddle and create a huge splash. Your conscious mind, on the other hand, is all about negatives. It can only negate things. And so it's the interface between these two, your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, that gives rise to conversations in which you say, I must do more of that. No, you really shouldn't. These kind of circular conversations take place all the time, this kind of self-talk, and it's not really good for us. Now, Ho'oponopono gets round that by simply addressing the subconscious mind as if it was a toddler. So it says, I'm sorry because I got this wrong. Please forgive me because I got this wrong. And also because in Hawaiian language there isn't the words for I'm sorry. The word sorry translates as please forgive me. Thank you for accepting my apology and recognizing that I've realized that I've made a mistake. And I love you because I do. We all love our subconscious minds, and quite rightly so. They record everything that's ever happened to us, and they will be around longer than your mother, your father, the member of the royal family, if you live in a royal kingdom like I do in the UK. They will live as long as you live in this body, and in fact, according to Ho'oponopono, and I believe this to be the case, even longer, because your conscious mind and your subconscious mind represent your soul, which that's the part of you that gets reincarnated into the future and into a future life, so you can carry on learning and discovering things. So what is this myth of Ho'oponopono? Well, it's basically the story from which we get our power, our ability to do things. And quite frankly, although the native kahunas and the ancient Polynesians and the people that probably lived on the islands before even the Polynesians arrived about 1,000 years ago, the whole nature of Ho'oponopono has changed. It changed with Morna, it started to change with her, and it certainly changed with Dr. Hugh Len. And it's changed again with the introduction of ideas from the law of attraction from Dr. Joe Vitale. And I think one of the main features of the change is the idea that we take 100% responsibility for whatever comes into our consciousness. So if you're having a bad relationship, it's not that you're 100% responsible and the other person isn't responsible at all. And it's not that you're 50% responsible and they're 50% responsible, or 30 and 80 or whatever, like a court would apportion blame, if you like. But it's about each of you being 100% responsible. And so you're concerned with your 100% responsibility. Clean that out, and your partner's 100% responsibility will get cleaned out as well. And then you'll be able to have a happier relationship, or no relationship at all. Who knows? It depends upon what inspiration you receive. The second part is that I do believe that this idea of God or divinity or whatever is going to be replaced by a concept called inspiration, and that's what I intend to do in the revised copy of the book when it comes out. I don't think it's helpful to have the idea of an overall deity that's all-knowing and all-wise and therefore is controlling the whole business, because that's very much rooted in the Western paradigm. I think the idea that we become inspired is very good, but where the inspiration comes from, who knows? I don't, you don't, nobody really knows. And I think that's going to be the next stage in the myth of Ho'oponopono. I'll leave you with one thought, and that is Ho'oponopono doesn't have to be accurate, but it will help you if you believe that your version of it is. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video and have a very great day.